Now going through 5 examples of multiplying decimals. With multiplying decimals, the first thing to do is just imagine there were no decimal points in the question. So I'm going to pretend it's not 0.4 times 0.2, but it's just 0.4 and 0.2 that I'm timesing together. In other words, just 4 times 2. Well, the answer to 4 times 2 is 8. Now that's not the answer that we're looking for, but it's an important result. Because if we look back up here, the original question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to underline any individual digit, that's any individual number that's after a decimal point. So here, that 4 is after a decimal point, and in this number that 2 is after a decimal point. I've underlined 2 digits. That means in my final answer, there's going to be, after my decimal point, 2 numbers will be there. I don't know what they are, but 2 numbers will be there. I said I don't know what they are. Actually, you do. This 8 is going to be one of them. Now, you've put this 8 in at the right-hand edge. So if these wavy lines are representing my 2 digits, my 8 will go there. There's a space here. If there's a space, you fill it with a 0. And it's got to be something before the point. And if there's nothing else to go there, that will be a 0. So 0.4 times 0.2 is 0.8. Now if you didn't get the hang of where these decimal points go in this place thing over here, you'll see some more examples and we'll do it again. But the key thing was here, there were 2 things, 2 individual numbers after decimal points in my question. It has to be the same in my answer. So I knew my answer was going to be something, point, something, something. 8 is my answer that I got to my other sum. And you put that over here as far to the right as you can, and then any spaces I filled up with zeros. I'm going to do another question now. My next question is going to be 3.51 times by 4, and I'm going to do it exactly the same way. First of all, pretend the decimal point wasn't there, and it would be 351 times by 4, and that's the sum that I'm going to do next. 351 times by 4. I'm going to do that using the grid method. I'm going to say that's 351 times by 4. So I'm making my multiplication grid. Then here, 4 times by 3 is 12. That's ignoring the noughts. But then looking at the noughts, how many noughts are there between those 2 numbers? Well, there are none here for the 4. There are 2 there, so that's 2 noughts. Over here, 4 5s are 20. And between these 2 numbers there's 1 0, so I'll put another 0 on the end. And 4 1s are 4. I now need to add these 3 numbers together. I'll do that as an adding up sum over here. If I add those together, I get 4, 0, 4 and 1. So the answer to this sum here was 1404. Well, let's go back to the original question. What numbers were after decimal points? Well, that 5's after a decimal point. That 1's after a decimal point. So there's nothing over here after a decimal point. So I've just got 2 digits after decimal points. So in my answer I have down here, 2 of these must be after decimal points, and exactly 2 of them. So my point's got to go in there. There I have 2 of my digits after a decimal point. So my answer is 14.04. Now, if you're thinking about it, this number up here was 3 and a bit times by 4. Well, 3 times by 4 is 12. So this number here should be a bit more than 12. And 14 is a bit more than 12. If I'd got this wrong and had said that was the answer, well, that's massively more than 12. If I had put the point in there, that's massively more than 12, and it's clearly wrong. And if I had put the decimal point there, that's way off 12, it's far too small. So you can always check by saying, well, that's about 3, that's 4, 3 4s are 12, I'm looking for something around about 12. And if you weren't quite sure, if you looked at any of those 4 answers, that's the one that's nearest 12, so that's the correct answer for that one. The next example I'm going to look at is 0.6 times by 9. We're doing it exactly the same way. Get rid of any decimal points. I get 0.6 times by 9, which is just 6 times by 9, and that's 54. So I know my answer to the original question is going to have a 5 in it and a 4 in it. Look back at the original question. That's after a decimal point. Nothing's after a decimal point here. So just one digit is after a decimal point. So my answer here, one of them and only one of them is allowed to be after a decimal point. So the point's got to go there. There you go, one digit after the decimal point. Look at the original sum just to check. This was something less than 1. So it's just a part of something. 0.6 is like a fraction or bit of something. A bit of 9, well, the answer to a bit of 9 is going to be smaller than 9. 5.4 is smaller than 9. That's about right. It all sort of seems to fit together. The next one I'm going to look at is 2.8 times by 0.7. If there were no decimal points there at all, that would be 28, that would be 0.7. So just 28 times by 7. And that's the sum I'm going to do next. Using the grid method, 28 times by 7. 7 times by 2 is 14. And between those two numbers is 1 naught. Over here, 7 8s are 56. If I add those two numbers together, I get 196. Looking at my original question up here, what's after a decimal point? That is, and that is. That's two numbers that are after decimal points. So in my answer down here, two of these and exactly two of them have to be after decimal points. So my point's got to go there. Then I have two digits in this answer after decimal points. The question here, as a check, was 2 point something times by something less than 1. It's going to be smaller. If I'm timesing by 0 point something, my final answer will be smaller than this one. And 1.96 is smaller than 2.8, so that seems to fit together. And the last example in this is going to be 2.86 times by 0.9. If I pretend the decimal points aren't there, 286 and 0.9, so 286 times by 9. If you do that in the grid method, 286 multiplied by 9. I'm going to do this one a little bit quicker. 9 2s are 18, and between those two numbers there are 2 zeros. 9 8s are 72, and between those numbers there's 1 0. And 9 6s are 54. Add those three numbers together. I get a 4, a 7, a 15, and 1 there, and that 1 make a 2. So I've got 2, 5, 7, 4. My answer is going to have those numbers in it. Look at the question. That was after a decimal point. That's after a decimal point. That's after a decimal point. That's three things after decimal points. So down here, three of these digits have to be after decimal points. Start from the right, 1, 2, 3. My point will go there. Now I have three digits after my decimal point. If you look at the question here, this was 2 point something times by 0.9. Timesing by a 0 point number makes it smaller. This number here is smaller than that, because 2.5 something is smaller than 2.8 something. It seems a reasonable answer. In fact, it's a correct answer.